Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISJL Virtual Vacation. My name is Nora Katz, and I'm the Director of Heritage and Interpretation at the Institute of Southern Jewish Life. If you tuned in to last month's episode, Southern Jewish Music, Jews, and Country, you'll remember that we left off with some questions. How are traditional Jewish musical styles connected to traditional American ones? What does it mean to combine them? And who are the folks making this music today? This episode, the second in our Southern Jewish music series, is all about Yiddish popular music, Klezmer, Bluegrass, old time, and American roots music. The intersection of these might seem like an unlikely marriage, but I hope that by the end of this episode, we'll have convinced you that these musical traditions have a lot more in common than you might think. Today we're featuring conversations with award-winning banjo player, musicologist, producer, and historian Henry Sapoznik, and Donnie Zaslav and Eric Lindberg of the acclaimed band Nefesh Mountain. We spoke candidly with all three of them about their work, their music, and how the traditions of Judaism, Yiddish popular music, and bluegrass intersect. I hope you'll find something meaningful and something to tap your feet to in this episode. Once again, I produced this episode in collaboration with Clara Posner, who worked with us as an intern this winter. Let's dive in. What is the landscape of Yiddish and American roots music? How do Jews play a role in performing, producing, and studying Americana, old time, and bluegrass music? In our last episode, we talked about how the American folk music revival of the mid-20th century brought a lot of Jews into the world of country music. But by the 1980s and 90s, many Jewish musicians returned to the worlds of both American and Jewish music genres by combining elements of traditional Jewish music, such as klezmer, with bluegrass and traditional Appalachian sounds, often really emphasizing their Jewish identities. Jewish bluegrass, known by some as Jewgrass, was born in this moment, allowing a substantial number of Jewish musicians and songwriters to find a place in the bluegrass scene. It also served as a launch pad for Jewish performers to take on more religious themes in their music. At the same time, pioneers like mandolinists David Grisman and Andy Statman and banjo players Henry Sapoznik and Bela Fleck were, all in their own unique ways, going back to the roots, if you'll pardon the pun, of Yiddish popular music, bluegrass, and old-time music. Even though folks like David Grisman, Andy Statman, Henry Sapoznik, and many others are sometimes associated with other genres, they're really known for their experimentations with bluegrass and traditional American music starting in the 1960s and 70s, continuing to explore traditional Jewish and Yiddish popular music alongside bluegrass, country, and American roots throughout their careers. For Henry Sapoznik, fusion isn't the name of the game. Instead, it's celebrating these two traditions, finding their interconnectedness and delivering virtuosic performances rooted in robust scholarship. To get a better understanding of the evolution of Yiddish popular music, bluegrass, and the intersections between the two, we'll talk to Henry Sapoznik. He's an award-winning author, record and radio producer, and performer of traditional Yiddish and American music. In 2002, Henry produced the Yiddish Radio Project for NPR's All Things Considered, which earned him a Peabody Award. Alongside his numerous recordings of old-time bluegrass and klezmer music, his most recent album, Banjo, features secular Eastern European Jewish instrumental music, such as Doinas, alongside old-time American fare like Mississippi Sawyer. We are so honored to have Henry here to share his expertise and his experiences with us.
Okay, my name is Henry H. Sapoznik. I am a musicologist of both American Southern music, early pop music, and Yiddish popular and traditional music. I'm a musician, writer, record producer, radio producer, just platforms for the dissemination of the history of American and American Yiddish music. My interest in music was that I grew up in a musical household. My late father, Zindel Sapoznik, Oliver Sholem, was a cantor who was trained in Eastern Europe, sang with some of the great cantors, Gershon Sirota, David Kusevitsky, and learned it as a child and the traditional apprentice system. So when my family came to the United States in 1949, my father picked up his cantorial career after it had stopped before World War because of World War II, and I began training as a cantor in the old-fashioned way of singing in choirs with my father, starting at the age of 6 and learning the traditional modes, the traditional cantorial scales, as my father had been what's called a meshoirer, an apprentice, a chorister, an apprentice cantor. So I grew up in a pretty unspectacular way. It was just a part of daily life. So my father was a cantor, so I learned that. I attended Hasidic yeshiva, Lubavitch. So my experience there taught me prayer modes, the articulations that one uses in studying Talmud and Rashi and Chumash. So I learned the vernacular articulations of an Orthodox schooling. I learned everything was kind of filtered through an East European Yiddish aesthetic. And because my father could not read music, my ear training, I had to learn what he learned by ear, and the training, even though it was really difficult, was turned out to be an astounding tool once I got interested in learning traditional American music, which also had very little written out. So when I eventually started getting into doing field work, it was helpful that I could internalize what I heard and then generate it outward. Well, the discovery of American roots music, uh, I it came as it was a kind of a liberation for me as a child of Holocaust survivors. Um, I had a difficult life, like I guess most children of Holocaust survivors who found themselves trapped between two worlds. American Jews did not know how to react to survivors, guilt, misunderstanding, anger, anything. So um, I grew up in an insular, extended community of other Holocaust survivors, and that world. I'm grateful for the insularity because it created a kind of a leak-proof soundscape where I could experience spoken, sung Yiddish on a daily basis, and it sort of heightened that kind of literacy on me. But at the same time, that was underscoring my otherness, which as a child and someone who wanted to fit in, the otherness was very disturbing. And so it was an uphill climb to be a yeshiva, a student, a for someone for whom English was a second language, to my to speed up the process of being part of dominant society. Even though, like a lot of kids who were like myself, the first or second generation of television watchers, American dominant culture was incredibly influential. But it was when I was introduced uh, uh, by some friends who Jewish, but their families had come to America long before World War II. So they were, to me, far more American than I was. When I was introduced to what was referred to as folk music in the '60s, and we're talking about Woody Guthrie, Cisco Houston, Leadbelly, Pete Seeger. Folk music um, became a kind of there was a clarity and a cleanliness to the music. And one of the great inspirations, one of the great appeals of the folk music movement, at least is what I experienced in New York, was that 98% of the people who were playing traditional American music were Jews. So I felt incredibly comfortable being in this extended community of other Jews who had totally internalized folk music and were, it was the end of the folk music popularity that had begun prior to World War II, with the folk music popularity of the early '50s, and then the McCarthy hearings, and then folk music became popular again in the '60s. So I really, I loved the music. I loved the fact that it was the soundtrack and organically a part of the anti-war movement. So it was both a cultural platform, and it was also a social literacy platform, that the music existed as this dynamic, this second, this underpinning. The real change in my view of this music, because really there was a part of me that over wanted to overachieve, that as a child of survivors, I wanted to embrace a part of American literacy, a part of American culture that even Americans with generations of families, even they were unaware of, either even they could not carry. So it became really important for me to internalize the folk music literature. The real uh, powerful change happened for me when I made the transition from Pete Seeger to his half brother Mike Seeger. And Mike Seeger, like his half brother, was passionately interested in traditional American music. The difference being that Pete Seeger saw American folk music as a platform for the presentation of progressive political worldview. So things were done to use, as the original folk music movement was a kind of an organizing tool of the Communist Party, of the sort of the Popular Front. Pete Seeger maintained that the function of the music was a gateway to raise the consciousness and to create a clearinghouse for people who loved the music. Mike Seeger, on the other hand, saw that music, the exact same music, but he saw it as an end in itself. He saw what was called old time music as a form of Southern vernacular music that had not gotten a proper amount of respect. It was really the red-haired stepchild of to certainly of country music, of music coming out of Nashville, where it didn't even reference it, and to a degree bluegrass, which was a more sophisticated jazz oriented version of old time country music. So I became, um, in a way, I became an old time music chassid. The same way I had been a chassid in the Lubavitch movement, I became an ultra orthodox about country music. And I would only want to play music that was derived directly without mediation from Nashville or any kind of sophisticating outlets. I wanted the music as the people themselves heard it and played it. And luckily in New York at this time, and we're really talking about the early 70s, there was the rise, what was called the old time music revival, record labels, magazines, concerts, and so forth. And I made friends with some other young New Yorkers who loved Southern music. And I made my first trip down south in 1972 to North Carolina, one of the first of many trips to Rockingham and Surrey County, North Carolina, to visit with the traditional musicians who lived there. And it became it was absolutely an astounding experience for me, seeing these cultures in full form. I was so I had a very kind of insular life, and was not, aware of this kind of world until I started traveling. And one of the things I was fortunate was that I was in an extended group of people who did this, who traveled down south to record and to learn from these players. So I got the best training on how to be a successful and how to be a respectful field worker, how to collect music and the life stories to humanize the music. I wasn't just interested in saying, well, show me where to put my hands on the banjo. Just that's all I'm interested in. The music was a gateway into the humanizing of the culture. And I was, in order to successfully do that, I had to not reference my own literacy. It was my literacy, where I came from, what I came out of, was totally unimportant to the people whom I was visiting with. I mean, if they asked, and eventually it became a really big issue, but I was there not to show them anything. I was there to sit at their feet and to internalize what they were doing. Um, Now, even though I had left the yeshiva, I had cut off my payas. I didn't, there was nothing overt about my Jewishness, except at that time in my life, I wore for quite a number of years. I wore a Magen David that my mother had managed to save a menorah when they were fleeing the Nazis in 1941, and when they went into hiding. And the menorah came back with them when they moved to the United States. And at some point, I don't know how, it became broken and the parts were kept. And there was a Magen David at the top of it. And I remember taking it into school. I had left yeshiva and I took it into the metal shop, and I cut the Magen David off and I turned it into a necklace, um, which I would wear at the base of my throat. It was impossible to miss. It was like if it had been neon with flares coming out of it with like a 500-watt flashing lights, it would have been no more apparent than leaving this. And and this was the arrangement, that I was not there to magnify my Jewishness. I was there to be a seeker. I was there to be with these people on their terms. Um, and yet it was unmistakable that I was a New York Jew, and I had no interest in suppressing that, even though I dubbed myself Hank, which was as much about Hank Williams as it was about Hank Greenberg, the great slugger for the Detroit Tigers. So Hank for me was part of my self-invention as a carrier of old time music, mostly banjo. I tried fiddle, but my neighbors made me give that up. Um, and um, and basically, this was from the years 1972 to 1977. I traveled to southern Virginia and in the Piedmont, northern North Carolina, mostly, and attended fiddle contests. Did a lot of playing with local players, and I guess the turning point was on one of these field trips. It was 77. It was the summer of 77. I was living in the home of a man named Tommy Jarrell in Mount Airy, North Carolina. And Tommy was a superb fiddler and banjo player, and he let me stay at his home while I studied with him. And at this time, uh, I was a I was a vegetarian, which was not a smart thing to do in the South at that time. And so I'm living with a guy who is making, everything is made in lard. The eggs, the bacon is in bacon fat. Even I think there was even bacon fat in the coffee. I think everything had trafe in it. And at not wanting to be disrespectful, even the biscuits, for God's sake, even the biscuits had pork in it. I mean, I was starving. Um, but I said to Tommy, I said, Tommy, I really, I mean, it's great. I mean, it smelled fabulous. I said, I can't eat it. And Tommy was confused. Come on, Hank, eat up. Come on. And I said, Tommy, I can't eat this stuff. And he says, what's the matter with you, Hank? What are you, a damn Jew? And it was like my head exploded. And like, I don't know which, I, to this day, I don't know which surprised me more, that he would say something like that, or that he knew enough about Jewish kashrus to know that this is forbidden food. So he asked me that, and I'm wearing a mug and dovet, for God's sake. And I said, well, Tommy, yes, I am a damn Jew. And then he tells me a Jew joke. And at first I thought it was a Jew joke, but he tells me the story about a local guy named, I think it was Greenberg or Greenfeld. Anyway, so he tells me the story. He says, "Oh, we have this Jew in town, Greenberg, and he's standing on the corner, and one of the town people come over to him and with his dog, and he says, 'Hey, Greenberg, this here's my dog. He's half Jew and half son of a bitch.'" To which Greenberg responded, he says, "Ah, I see he's a little kin to both of us." And he told me, and I could not believe it. This was not a Jew joke. This was a Jewish joke. The Jew is not seen as a fool or as a money grubbing parasite, but he's clever, and he uses humor to diffuse the situation. And at which point, Tommy starts to tell me, we start talking about Jews. It was like really strange. This is the last thing I wanted to do. I didn't go to North Carolina to learn about Jews. But in our talking, Tommy said to me, he says, so, and he was confused because all of the seekers, everyone who was coming to his home and to Fred Cockrum's home and to Kyle Creed, all the local musicians in Round Peak had been hosting these New Yorkers who had come down to study this music in a way that even their own children were not interested in the music, that it was these New York Jews or Catholics, the same thing, were coming. And Tommy said, what is this, Hank? Don't your people got none of your own music? I mean, he was really puzzled. And I was, again, my gob was smacked. I could not believe that the question he was answering. But what it did was it got me thinking about looking at this world that I had introduced myself into, Southern vernacular, white, Scots Irish, Protestant music. I mean, how much more different than me could this possibly be? And it got me thinking about my own music, which I had, even though I had spent my life growing up with, I wasn't interested. I mean, I sang the stuff, I knew the whole, but it wasn't something that lifted my spirits the same way that playing banjo and fiddle. Um, but it got me, it set me off in a dramatic departure, even though I continued my trips down south while at the same time I used the same skill set that I had developed in collecting Southern music. I used the same field collecting techniques that I had used there and dedicated them to my community in New York to to kind of reestablish a continuity with understanding vernacular, the equivalent Yiddish music to what Tommy and Fred and those guys were playing down south. That became my life passion. That I knew that there was a music like this, but I had not. I was aware of it, but I hadn't made the connection that they existed on a exact linear plane. And this was 77 that I began shifting my expanding, not shifting, because I was still doing both Southern musicology and now Yiddish stuff, and that became the really the shape of my life, of my musical life. Subsequent, I still maintain a strong passion for Southern music as much as I do for the music I grew up with. There are periodic moments in American popular music that made use of quote unquote Jewish elements, mostly the equivalent of blackface minstrelsy, mostly when Jewish identity was invoked in American popular music, it was in a diminishing and a condescending way. Vaudeville validated dialect comedy, Italian, Irish, Jewish, Polish. So the critical thing, as I found, was to view the perception of Jewish culture in American pop music as a parallel to the rise of a freestanding Yiddish popular culture, and where they touched each other periodically. It became, I guess the thing for me is I really, my interest, I think my over abiding interest is where two disparate cultures come in contact and how these cultures resolve the inconsistencies, how they create a kind of a middle uh, culture. which makes use of elements of both and how basically people navigate uh, through it. So American popular music took a periodic interest in a superficial way. I mean, which is not to say, of course, that so many of the great American songwriters, Irving Berlin, the Gershwins, Jimmy Van Heusen. I mean, most of the great composers were Jewish, and they may not have been culturally literate. Irving Berlin could speak Yiddish, but he reinvented himself. So none of these Jews went into American popular music to say, oh, I want to raise the visibility of Yiddish culture. No, they didn't give a crap about that. They were looking to assimilate, and the best way to do that is to use the models that had already been developed by previous generations of immigrants who became part of American culture. So it became for me a kind of a toggling between decoding Southern vernacular music on its own terms and Yiddish popular music on its own terms. And in fact, on one, no, two trips in the late 70s when I was going down south, I developed this interest of trying to see what was Jewish life. I took an interest in what was Jewish life in the South, and especially during the same time that the recordings that I was listening to, the golden age of country music from the 1920s, um, I, that was my standard, and it took me quite a while to come up with a revised history of Southern life, which included both questions mostly and answers very infrequently about how Southern Jews conducted their lives in a way which reflected the kind of easy access that we had up north. So, for example, in all the years that I was doing research, I could never find, I still to this day, especially during this period, like I'm saying, the 20s and 30s, when there was accelerated migration of Jews to the South who were coming into Galveston as part of the resettlement movement, and they became part of Southern life. But where did they get? Who played music at Jewish weddings in the 20s? Did they bring musicians down from New York? I don't believe that the hillbilly fiddlers are going to learn Freilachs and Bulgars to play for Jews who want to have traditional music. I certainly knew that there were circuit riding rabbis and there were circuit riding cantors, the Baltfilas, that communities had to share them. But how did you deal with having uh, Jewish life cycle music that enabled you to fulfill the commandment at a wedding or at the dedication of a Torah scroll? So this was one of the things that, and of course, like a lot of people, I dove into the books of Harry Gold, and I became friends with Eli Evans, um, and I was just so thrilled that I could do both. I could do I could be a searcher in the narrative of Jews in the South, and while at the same time I was playing klezmer music and old time music. And because I grew up in a very kosher home, um, I knew you don't mix meat and milk. And to me, old time music was meat and klezmer music was milk. And I wasn't about to play Yiddish music in a Southern style, and I certainly wasn't about to play traditional Yiddish music on in a banjo style that from the South. I wanted these music forms to be as I heard them originally, I didn't want to change them. I wanted to be a gateway to carry the intensity and the honesty of this music without superimposing, even inadvertently, my own change. I didn't want to bring change to it. That wasn't my job. Mostly what I have learned, I think most of the outlets for my work have been in using period commercial recordings as an unfettered example of how the music was played and how it was perceived. So I have, I don't know, 40 or 50 anthologies that I've produced um, from Southern, both hillbilly music, early blues, early jazz, a lot of cantorial, a lot of klezmer music, a lot of Yiddish theater, and so all of my work is always coming back to the question of how do you retain a traditional cultural literacy? How do you retain the DNA of a received narrative of Yiddish and Ashkenazic culture, even though, you know, in America at that time, there was no ESL. People were not encouraged to maintain their duality identity. You come to America, you become an American. This was the narrative. So I, again, in my sort of self-invention as an historian, I made a promise to myself that I would never superimpose my contemporary values, my contemporary political, social, economic values. I would never impose them on analyzing Southern music or Yiddish music from that period because they weren't doing it. So it would have been ahistorical. It's what's called presentism. I am against presentism by superimposing contemporary values on period music. So, for example, I have an anthology I did last year called Proto-Billy, where I showed the influence of blackface minstrelsy on the earliest generation of recordings by uh, black blues artists, early country performers, and to really show how minstrelsy uh, was both a degrading superimposition, but also how musicians cleverly subverted the original racist subtext and made this music their own, and by extension, liberated the parts of that music which were not, in fact, racist. So that was really interesting to see how an outside music superimposed, because of course blacks were not allowed to do minstrelsy for the first 40 years. They didn't Blacks weren't allowed on stage until the 1880s. Um, and it's just actually the big arc is the work I'm doing now, which is on documenting a movement between the two world wars of African American cantors, and seeing, again, turning everything I knew upside down, because the received narrative about Jews in America, especially in tandem with viewing Black culture, is that the standard received narrative is that Jews, in encountering Black music, became promoters, managers, record labels. They were constantly taking in Black music and then mediating it and then consumerizing it in a way that kind of removes it from the Black community. But suddenly I'm finding that the discovery of these Black cantors, and include, it must be like a dozen, including a woman, This is the only known example of African Americans who completely internalized Ashkenazic Yiddish culture and became carriers of Yiddish and Hebrew cantorial music. Totally smashes all of the paradigms that we have had about the relationship between Jews and blacks. So even though I'm still a young man at, how I don't know how old I am, but it's still, the received narrative is still incomplete. And so I am constantly having to challenge myself to look at all of this new history, and it has come. I honestly, I can't believe I'm the only one who's ever done it, but I guess I am. That it has forced every historian who has written about this dynamic to question the extent of their own research, that they missed this astounding historical moment, which I do not believe happened in any other community. So again, the influence of Yiddish on American popular music, much the same way that I have an interest in the influence of Jews in Southern music. I I I did a record a couple of years ago of my own music called Banjo, and one of the pieces that I did was a Appalachian murder ballad called "The Peddler and His Wife," which talked about the murder of a couple in the 1920s, and I knew enough about the history that as soon as I found this tune called "The Peddler and His Wife," I said, "Wait a second, who were peddlers at that time in the South? They were Jews." So I immediately knew that this song was probably the only song about a Jewish murder that became an Appalachian ballad, as opposed to a large number of Southern songs, mostly from Georgia, talking about the Leo Frank trial and the murder of Mary Fagan. And it became like astounding how many commercial recordings I found that talked about this episode. One of the only Jewish lynchings. I've discovered two Jewish lynchings, including one of a Black Jew who was lynched, and which I'm now starting to do the research on that. So there's all of these pockets of the interaction between Jewish and Southern life that have been undiscovered because they don't fit into a neat package of Southern music. You read any of the received histories of Southern music, and it's this straight line from the square dances in the South to the rise of Nashville to Dollywood, and that's a top-down history, which never interested me. History in that respect is the prerogative of the victors. And I set myself the goal of writing history from the bottom up. And by doing that, I come in contact with a lot of inconsistencies that don't have a glib, seamless answer. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Here's a recording of Henry playing The Peddler and His Wife, the Appalachian murder ballad whose subjects are Jews. You can hear this track on his 2017 album, Banjo.
Just as the sun was rising high one day in merry June, the birds were singing in the trees, old nature seemed in tune. A peddler and his wife were traveling along a lonely way, sharing each other's toils and cares. They both were old and gray. would they think men their dear lives would take? Alas, for them this scheme was laid by some treacherous men, with hearts as hard as any stone, and did not care for sin. They were hidden by the road, with hearts like murderous Cain, with voices hushed and weapons aimed to kill the weary twain. Just then a wagon came in view, shots rang upon the air, and while the echoes died away, the living perished there. I fell out upon the ground and tossed her dying head. Those men rushed out and took her gold, poor lady, she were dead. He rushed on with its dying man, till kind friends checked their speed. Alas, alas, it was too late to stop this horrible deed.
At the end of the day, if you were to wake me up in the middle of the night and say, "Quick, what do you do for a living?" I would say I'm a banjo player. I mean, that is the first time the banjo, especially Southern style clawhammer banjo, was my first self-invention. I mean, I was playing Bob Dylan and that kind of stuff before, but that was received. I didn't go out and search that stuff out. It was very accessible. So each of these skills, which I have developed subsequently, like a festival promoter, like I ran an event for 30 years called Klezmer, which and here's the thing. Everything I've done, or the books I've written, the tune books, or the reissues, the festivals I've run, the camps I've run, everything had a precedent in the old time music community and the folk music world. So, for example, the first reissue that I did in 1978, the first Klezmer reissue, I did it for a label called Folkways, which was run by a man named Mo Ash, whose father was a Yiddish writer, Sholamash. And Mo, in generously allowing me to do this record, how old was I? I was like 23. Enabled me to do something on the behalf of learn a skill of being a record reissue producer, which then got me into writing about this stuff. I came out with a couple of books. Each of these skill sets were meant to bolster the other skill sets, the other things I had done. So books were meant to support the records were meant to support the concerts were meant to support the camps that I ran. This stuff wasn't taught in school. You didn't study ethnomusicology, and they didn't teach you how to do this. This was all in the field, sink or swim. And I've been, again, really fortunate that I learned these skills of the platforms, while at the same time honing my critical analytic understanding of both how to play the music and how to account for it in a proper historical methodology. Well, I think that I'm a big fan of traditional music. I think you can't beat hearing stuff in the voices of the people who lived it, as opposed to someone who mediates it, fixes it, smooths it out. Um, so my work, I like to think, is kind of like what I learned as a Boy Scout and about camping. You leave the campsite the way you found it. And I have no interest in studying music. I guess I don't leave it the way I found it now that I think about it, because that would be that would break the agreement I have about raising cultural literacy. But I don't change it for frivolous means. I do it in order to replace a missing part of the narrative that explains the give and take of Jews in the South and of Yiddish music. And I my in my own passions, I thought that I would have this sort of like this outward motion, that I would move from having been a kid who learned all this cantorial stuff by ear to getting into folk music, to playing old time music, to being a carrier of the music, and then to get into Yiddish music. And each one of these takes me farther away. And then I realized, no, it's taking me farther in. I continually come back to reference my earliest knowledge of Jewishness and my earliest understanding of the culture in the South. And I'm I feel really incredibly fortunate that I was able to do this at a time that, because there was no interest, there was no resistance. I could invent the platforms for this myself, and did for decades. And so I have a lot of stuff that I have put out, and I would like to think that my work is a platform for the next generation to use for their own discovery, for their own self-realization. And I've been grateful to have students who came to me, who I then sent on their way. That's what I want. I want people to, I would like my work to be something which propels people in their own search the way it propelled me in mine.
I love Henry's use of kashrut as a metaphor, with old-time music as meat and klezmer as milk. He doesn't mix the two, but he does put them in conversation with each other in unique and often surprising ways. But that's not the only approach that contemporary Jewish performers are taking to this music. Producers and performers like Henry Sapoznik advocate for keeping Jewish music and bluegrass separate, while still exploring their interconnectedness. Other artists, like Donny Zaslav and Eric Lindberg of the acclaimed Jewish Americana band Nefesh Mountain, find meaning and creative catharsis in connecting these two traditions in their music, weaving Jewish text and tradition into the equally rich tradition of bluegrass music. This episode is really meant to put these two approaches to this music in conversation with each other. There is no one correct way to make music rooted in Jewish and American tradition. Instead, we're here to celebrate all the ways in which Judaism intersects with American roots, bluegrass, and old-time music. We spoke to Donny and Eric about their inspirations, about the origins of their music, about how they connect Judaism to traditional American musical styles, and about how their Jewishness plays a role in their songwriting. We're so honored to have them in this episode. Donny and Eric, take it away.
So we're a band called Nefesh Mountain, and my name is Eric, and my beautiful, lovely wife, Donny. And in case you were wondering, not socially distanced, we are podding, we're married, we're a couple, and we actually have a full bluegrass band that is a 5-piece band that we tour with when it's a non-COVID year and when things are normal. And we're a bluegrass band. We're inspired by all things bluegrass Americana. We're just, we're bluegrass musicians. And at the same time, there's a lot to kind of unpack when we talk about our music, but on the surface, we're a bluegrass band, and we also approach a lot of our songs and our music from a standpoint of being really proud Jewish Americans. and that can go in so many different directions for many of our different songs, where some of them might be more spiritual, but others might be purely about our culture and our kind of just identity in this world as Jewish Americans. Kind of, so it kind of floats around to those various points of being Jewish. And our pride in also just being American, and that's what shows in the music. Obviously, you can see I've got a banjo here, and we try to do justice and really honor both our Jewish traditions as well as the beautiful American traditions of musical traditions.
I would say that the real story of Nefesh Mountain, the beginning of Nefesh Mountain, really is a love story. Eric and I fell in love, and as we were falling in love, this music kind of just I feel like it just like poured out of us. We were both being very authentic with who we are, and it accidentally started to happen. And I think in the beginning we didn't even realize that we were making this music exactly. It just kind of happened, and then we had to catch up with it, and then we had to figure out, oh, we have this new thing and we should probably call it something. And so it happened very much soulfully and organically for us, I would say. Yeah. In the beginning, for sure.
Well, we have too many to name right now. Of like many musicians, we're influenced by so many different styles of music. But what I will say is that some of our hugest influences in the bluegrass world have actually become our dear friends over the years, and like uncles to us down in Nashville. And we've really had there's no other word besides the honor to play with guys like Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas and Brian Sutton and Tony Trischka and David Greer, and like the list goes on. People that I love as guitar players, banjo players, dobro, mandolin, and these are guys that have created the genre, that have really defined it for decades, since the original, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys and Flatt and Scruggs and the Stanley Brothers. Those were kind of the original, years of bluegrass, started around 1945, give or take. And but in the 70s all the way through the present, the guys that I just mentioned, other guys like Tony Rice and Bela Fleck, are just huge influences for me, because they took what was a rather small world of bluegrass music, and for me, they kind of exploded it into this more inclusive. It had more influences from jazz and from rock and roll and singer-songwriter and folk. And we find ourselves kind of at an age where, making music in this time right now, that bluegrass is very accepting of those things. I don't think you could have played, and I hate this term, but like Jewish bluegrass, it doesn't really wear that well for me, like Jewish bluegrass. But we couldn't have done this in the 90s even, maybe in the 90s, but like I think it took the world a little bit to catch up, and I think we just find ourselves at a time where it feels right and it feels like it's long overdue. Because what we're trying to do is just add the world of Americana music is so beautiful, and has so much inside of it. And I should also say that Americana music and bluegrass and old time and country, it started as actually some of the first string bands in this country were black, were not just the white string bands that we can look at in history books, because many things have been erased from history. And we're learning only this now. We're learning that some of the first string bands were actually black, and the slaves brought the banjo from Africa and those different rhythms, and at the same time, the white community brought the Scots-Irish culture down from Europe. So this music has this pain inside of it and this beauty, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but while hopefully I'm making sense, but at the same time, right in the I'm talking about the beginnings of this old time music. Another major staple of the music and kind of function of it was that it was gospel music, some of it, much of it. And, it's always been spiritual. It's always been this kind of form. But, we as Jews, we've been living in these states since the 1600s. And I think we just feel like now it's kind of long overdue that we're at least able to add our own perspective to the world that is so beautiful and so true, and very simply just folk music that is American music. So we're both from the Northeast. We're Yankees, and we're talking to you guys, and this is, for Southern Jewish life. And I'm really excited to be talking about this with you because we've played so much in the South, and part of our hearts belong.
We have Southern souls.
We have
for
Southern
sure.
souls. Some of my family lives in Georgia
Yeah.
as well. So I've been, as a
Your
kid,
whole-
I would spend I'm from Brooklyn, not exactly the hotbed of bluegrass music.
It is now.
It is now.
Actually.
There's a lot of bluegrass musicians
Yeah.
in Brooklyn, but it's of course it started in the South. It started as mountain music, the Smokies and the Appalachian Mountains. But I did spend a lot of my summers down there, and I think that's partly where it seems organic to me. But we both, when we met, Donnie mentioned it's a love story, and it is. It's very much we both realized how much we both loved country music and this kind of feeling of not only country music per se, but the feeling of the kind of Wild West and open prairies and the landscape of America and the idea of, we love nature and we write a lot of songs about nature, and I think when we're writing and we think of just the word Americana, I picture horses running free and wild Mustangs and canyons and mountains and pastures and cows, and there's something that is greater than me about that word and about the landscape of America, and I think this music helps tell that story. And again, for us, I think it works because we've been listening to this music for our whole lives, and we're Jewish Americans, so this really helps marry these two worlds for us, the Jewish Americana. But and just to answer your question more thoroughly, I started I actually studied jazz music in college, but I kind of had to hide in the practice. I was secretly playing bluegrass stuff at the same time. So I've just been a huge bluegrass fan and player and kind of student of the music between banjo and guitar, and I play a little mandolin and dobro as well. So it's something that found me. It wasn't like natural to be there in Brooklyn and have bluegrass come out, but somehow I had to seek it out and really find out this is the stuff that I love. And I know you wanted to add to it too.
No, I was just going to say there's something about this style of music that is so pure and authentic and really spiritual. And, for us, for me, I'll speak for myself, so much of, because a lot of this style of music that we love so much is gospel and is coming from a Christian perspective, or as a Jewish woman person, I don't feel comfortable singing that music. I love it. I really love listening to it. But if I'm going to get on a stage and sing something, it has to be true to me. And so I think, loving this music so much and then wanting our souls to kind of come through it is sort of how it sort of happened.
So yeah, let's do it. Let's do a song. We're going to share a little medley that we've been playing a lot. We've been fortunate to play a lot of Zoom concerts these days of COVID, and this is one we've been doing a lot. A medley we've been doing a lot, and it's an old time song called "Down in the River to Pray," which the first time I heard it was actually Doc Watson's version. I think he sings "Down in the Valley to Pray," and then of course this song was also hugely made famous by the great Coen brothers, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which set bluegrass on this fire course of stardom. But this is our little version of it. We've tweaked the lyrics slightly, and we're going to pair it. Sometimes we like doing medleys of maybe a more traditional old time song from the South with one of our own, and this is also another song about nature it's brand new also. It's called "In the Wide Open Air," and it's inspired by Rebbe Nachman, who was this hipster rabbi
Right.
that had all these radical, beautiful ideas. And one of them was the idea that we should go out and I'm looking actually out my window, just past us to paint the picture. And there's snow on the ground. We're up here, right near New York, and there's trees everywhere. And I know that we haven't been outside yet today, but I know at some point we're going to go out and just kind of stand and let our kind of spirits kind of be in the wild and just kind of be one with nature, even if for a brief moment.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall follow Miriam's path? Oh Lord, show me the way. Oh sisters, let's go down. Let's go down, come on down. Oh sisters, let's go down. So I think it's so funny because when we first started Nefesh Mountain, I think the first challenge that we had in a way was to bring we had to bring bluegrass into the Jewish world. And that was a little bit that took a minute, because a lot of synagogues were like bluegrass and the banjo, bringing the banjo into the synagogues, and we had to kind of like we had to find our way with that, and people had to trust us that we were not really like a shticky bluegrass banjo kind of thing. This was soulful music and genuine. So in the beginning, we played primarily for synagogues, and we had the hurdle of and the honor really of introducing bluegrass music into the Jewish communities, which was amazing. And we got in those days, in the beginning days, people came up to us, and still do now, but a lot of people would come up to us in synagogues and be like, oh my God, I thought I didn't like bluegrass, but I think I love it, and I thought maybe it was like something different, but thank you so much for so we had a lot of people opening their hearts and ears to bluegrass in Jewish communities. That was awesome. As Nefesh Mountain has progressed in these last number of years, we've started to play more and more secular venues, and we're starting to, we play bluegrass festivals and all types of music venues with audiences of all backgrounds, which has been really exciting for us. There have been moments that it's been, especially when it first started to happen, we first started playing big festivals, and it was a scary thing. It was a very, we were really putting ourselves out there. And, in these last couple of years in America, in this country, there's been so much hate and anti-Semitism, and it was a little bit of a fearful feeling to be so exposed. However, I would say that that all of this hate and all of the anti-Semitism that we've seen has only fueled us and made us feel even stronger and more committed to putting out love and being openly Jewish in this way. It's become everything to us. And I'll just say this one moment that I can remember when we played this huge festival in Raleigh, North Carolina. There was like a sea of people, like thousands and thousands down the street. They in Raleigh, and we were getting on the stage with the band, and I just had, and there was a lineup of musicians. We were one of them. The people who were watching didn't necessarily know who was coming next, and so I was so afraid that the minute we got on stage and started singing in Hebrew, or they understood now, they clicked that we're Jewish, and I was afraid they would yell, they would leave, I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was during, there was a lot of things going on in this country. So, but I remember I looked at Eric, I was like, I don't think I can do this. I started shaking, and I was like, I had like a panic attack. But then I had this moment of like, well, I have to speak my truth. We're here. I'm going to do this. I'm strong. This is me. And whatever happens, I believe, I have to do this. And so we got up on the stage, and I'm like nervous, and we start playing, and people don't leave. Actually, people started to come. More people came and started surrounding the stage, and clapping and crying. And then at the end of the show, we got this big standing ovation, and I'm crying. And it was like this incredible moment of just like, maybe the world is not so bad, and maybe people are more open, and maybe through music, people can kind of feel things in a different way and see people in a different way. And, the last thing I'll say about that is, there were many people who came up to us after that show, and subsequent, and have through the years since that night, people have come up to us and said, I've never met anybody Jewish, and I didn't know that you guys are so much like, you guys are like hippies. You're all about love. I'm like, I know, that's what we are. We're all about love, And people have come up to us saying like, I had a grandfather who was Jewish, and I haven't really connected with my roots, but like, I'm so grateful that I got to meet you guys. And so it just, this music and this whole world of Nefesh Mountain has really like opened our hearts. And if we can change somebody's perception, maybe for, a split second of what a Jewish person is, or maybe open someone's heart for a moment, then this is all like the biggest gift in the world, that we get to do this.
And I meant to throw this in on the last question that you were answering about how our music was received at first. And I think what came to mind was, I think it took us a little bit of time when we first started making this music to figure out as a vehicle how we were going to use music to tell our story. And it's taken us years, and we're still figuring it out. And I think now we're really getting close to feeling like we're at home when we're writing. Not to take anything away from the first and second albums. We also have a new album that's coming out very soon. And what I mean to say is, all of our songs have we've really tried to borrow from different influences. Like you said before, some of our songs might be about an ancient text, and then maybe drawing from that and writing our own kind of bluegrass or singer-songwriter style song around that. But for this last record, we're also finding ourselves writing songs just about our lives, kind of our connections, a lot about things that are happening in the world. And actually, this new album that we're coming out with is called Songs for the Sparrows, and there's a lot to talk about with this one. But I'll just say that we in summer 2018 we took a trip to this kind of sums up a lot of our influences, at least now, for songwriting. But we took a trip. Donnie's mother, my mommy-in-law, brought us to Eastern Europe, to Poland and Ukraine, where we visited the towns where our ancestors were from. And I'll do the kind of fast track that we saw so much of the devastation of the war that I've only seen in either documentaries or in textbooks or something. But to see it firsthand, to be out in the woods where our ancestors were like taken and shot, and to be there with our kids and our family and kind of really breathe that air in Eastern Europe and be in the Carpathian Mountains where both of our families were from. Hers was more in Lviv, and ours were, all in that area. And then we flew back home, and then just a couple months later was in the States was the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, and that kind of totally knocked us out. We wrote a song dedicated to that community and to the kind of all of our collective pain at that time. And then since then, there's just been more and more and more, right up until the insurrection, but we've also seen so many cemeteries get defaced. So the same things that were happening, in World War II in Europe are still happening here today. The same kind of things, the same, swastika, the hate, and the anti-Semitism.
And that's what our new music was kind of a response to. I think that was our reaction to the trip to Europe, coming home to the Tree of Life, and then all of those other events. So that's what this last album in a way is, and it's not like a sad album.
No, I know I'm being a little.
No, it's a looking sad at the truth and looking at the pain, and then also believing in love and celebrating life, and so the songs are kind of, they all have different stories, and some of them, there's a couple. We have a Hashkivenu on that album, but we have a song that was inspired by, my daughter, our daughter, and Anne Frank. There's a lot. It's like everything that we were feeling is in this album.
Yeah. So I don't know if it fully answered the question, but I love writing songs, setting music to prayer, especially the ones that I grew up with that mean a lot to me. And I think that there's this really weird line that I never saw as a kid between not even between, but that kind of runs right through religion and culture. And I think that people's religion, to me, or I'll just speak for myself, my own religious beliefs and my views on Judaism, the way that I am Jewish, is such a personal thing. And I don't think we're as outward with that specifically, although we definitely share, like Hashkivenu, and like that song we just played, in the wide open air, is inspired by a prayer by Rabbi Nachman. But one of the things that I noticed as a fan of Americana music and bluegrass music is that people that maybe aren't even practicing Christians can get away with singing a song about Jesus or about Lord or to be spiritual without it being like Christian music specifically. And I think that I always thought that it was like, well, if American music is almost synonymous at times with Christianity, how does a Jewish person in America fit in that also is like dying to play bluegrass music, which is for me as a kid? And this is our answer to that. It's like, how do we come into it by being spiritual and being authentic and being ourselves in the music? And I think that's where we strive to really find that middle ground where it's both cultural and relevant and exists and it functions as a song and also really stands up and is like, we're Jewish and this is what we believe. And
but you don't have to be Jewish to listen to the music.
No, and that's another thing that we really don't want to like push anyone away.
We don't want to be like you. Oh, yeah. So. I mean, just my own feeling about it is that both in the bluegrass tradition and in the Jewish tradition, there's a very big celebration of nature and mountains. And I think that there's just something like, something very, there's this common thread that we felt immediately. But I think beyond that, and much more than that, I think and what Eric had talked about a little bit in the history of this music, I feel like this style of music has a sadness, a pain, and a major joy and like a ruach to it. Like it's got like energy and really a big spirit. And I think that that's something that our Jewish history, is all about. Like we've had pain, but we have joy, and it's like big feelings, and we've had a really tough history, but there's so much light in it. And I just think there's something about that piece of the stories, both in the bluegrass and old time tradition, music, and in our Jewish history, that just feels right. And it's that spirituality that existed also in the music, and bringing the Jewish spirituality into it. For us, it just feels like it just clicks and it just feels right. There's just something about it that just makes sense. At least for us, it just makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing I would just say is that this music is coming, nefesh means soul in Hebrew, and this is a very, very authentic style music. This is coming from our truth, from our lives. And, it's definitely not, there's no shtick in our music. That would be one thing I would want people to know. I'd also want people to know that we really take, and I would say this about Eric, he takes the history and the style of the genre very seriously, and he wants, we really try to maintain integrity with the music itself and the styles of music that we play, even though we are kind of combining certain things, but there's a lot of respect that we want to pay to the genre and to those who who we look up to in that genre, and as well as a deep respect for Jewish tradition and love of the tradition. So we would want someone to know that this is we try to be the most respectful and loving and caring in the way we write this music, and that it's not just like a mashup. It's like a true. It's like a truth. There's a truth to it, and there's a lot of care in it and love. The moments that mean the most to me in terms of feeling like the music means something is, when I get an email or a call, or I speak to someone who tells me that, they listened to a song, when they were in pain about someone dying in their family, and that was the song that got them through. Or maybe, someone the other day called me and said, I just want you to know that your album got me through the pandemic, and every morning I take a walk and I listen to it, and it's like, that's what this is about. It's like, if this music can just touch somebody a little bit, like, it just reminds, it's like, I just want to hold all those little, when people tell me that, it means so much to us, because otherwise, we don't know. So it just means the world to feel that this music could be really touching people's hearts. And when people tell us that, it's like, oh my God, it just means the world.
Yeah. I think we're really excited for this new record, because for us it's the most personal, I think, and there's songs about, just love songs between us and each other, and also it is by far the most musically adventurous album that we've written. And I should also say it features our Nashville, our true Nashville heroes, Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush and Brian Sutton came on, and also some amazing Irish Celtic musicians that we adore and love, that are now also new kind of brothers. John Doyle, who's an amazing singer, and is just one of my favorite all-time guys to listen to. He was in a band called Solus, and he joined us on about 3 tracks. And I think we mentioned it as we did take a trip to Europe last year. There's a lot of Celtic influence on this record. We didn't go to Ireland on that trip, but I kind of felt like musically to bring in some of, Americana music also has this deep connection with the Scots-Irish tradition. And a lot of the fiddle tunes, as a bluegrass person, and you grow up playing fiddle tunes, are from that area. And I just felt like bringing in some sort of bit of Europe would help tell that story, like the song that we feature that John Doyle on is the one that kind of is dedicated to Anne Frank and our little daughter, Millie. And there's quite a number of pieces that bring in this European influence. And I think telling it through a Celtic lens helped bring that out. So it's really, to us, it's the most adventurous record. We're so can't wait to get it out.
Yeah. And I would say just in the meantime, what we're doing is we're doing tons of Zoom concerts before the pandemic, allows us to go out on the road again. And then hopefully starting in the fall and the winter, we'll be touring back with our band. God willing, with our...
in case they didn't know, Donnie's pregnant.
And so we're going to have an au pair and an entourage and the baby and we're back on the road and we're really excited. Hopefully that will be our path. But we're super excited to start touring again. And in the meantime, we're happy to be online and home and doing these shows. And
actually, the first show that's on the books, and we are hoping that it happens, is in September, late September. It's Merlefest. It's like kind of the granddaddy of bluegrass festivals down there in Wilkesboro, North Carolina.
So if it happens, which it's supposed to happen, if you're around, come to that festival. And otherwise, we'll hopefully we'll see. We'll be back at when we're touring, we really bop around. So we'll hopefully see everybody.
Yeah. So this is another brand new song, and it's called Where Oh Where. And it's got kind of this old Celtic, maybe English almost, kind of old riddle song kind of vibe to it, like an old troubadour kind of riddle tune. And we had John Doyle playing bouzouki on this track. And in the studio, we were tracking it, and when Donnie was laying down the vocals, he noticed that in the refrain of the song, the refrain is a nigun, which is a wordless melody, a wordless chorus. And this is in the Jewish world, a nigun is very yidadai and digidai, and there's lots of kind of syllables that would go with that. But John said to us in the control room of the studio, he's like, it's the same in Ireland in Celtic music. It's just called lilting. If you're a guitar player and you're teaching a tune or a tune, as you might say, to a fiddle player or an accordion or something like that, you would just lilt. You would hum them the melody. If it's like a lark in the morning or something, you would sing like so it's like the same thing. So many cultures must have, I don't know what the word is in different ones, but we realized that the Celtic and Jewish connection there with wordless melody. Anyway, we kind of we wrote the melody and the lyrics to the rest of the song, but John helped us kind of co-write, find a little kind of lyrics that might be shared from the Celtic spirit and the Eastern European Jewish spirit. So you'll notice that as we play this song, and it's called Where Oh Where. And we'll kind of leave you with this one. Not exactly a bluegrass one, but one that we feel like really does speak to that kind of Americana landscape and kind of global landscape these days.
Sweetest songs of Miriam and her daughters. They were sung beside the seas and tides, so still must be out in the waters, still on the waters. Where, oh, where is the wisdom sought by the many before us? She was there inside the tree of life, so still must reside in the forest, still in the forest. Yaddy-di-di-di-dum-di-di-di-dum-di, diddle-dum-di, daddy-di-di-di-dum-di-di-dum-di, diddle-dum-di. Where, oh, where is the innocence from our first days in Eden? They used to rest their heads on the flower beds, so still must be there in the gardens, still in the gardens. Yaddy-di-di-di-dum-di-di-dum-di, diddle-dum-di, daddy-di-di-di-dum-di-di-dum-di, all the rain the earth remained, so it's still in the fields and the meadows, in the fields and the meadows. Where's our compassion? Is it somewhere we can discover? It's never too far, it's right where you are. It's always been in the arms of each other.
Thank you so much to these incredible artists for sharing their time, their insights, and their expertise with us. For me, and I think for our interviewees, the story of Judaism and bluegrass is a story of innovation and experimentation, paired with reverence and appreciation for the rich traditions of Yiddish popular music, Judaism, and American roots music. I think that Henry, Donnie, and Eric have all made pretty compelling arguments for the necessity of connecting Jewish tradition and bluegrass, albeit in different ways. If you still need convincing, check out the Jews, Country, and Bluegrass playlist linked on the ISJL Virtual Vacation website. We have only scratched the surface of this rich and complicated story. If you're a fan of these music-themed episodes, you're going to want to join us next month for a virtual visit to the Mississippi Delta. We'll talk about the region's rich Jewish history, meet Jews who currently live in the Delta or who have roots there, and we'll also introduce you to the rich history of the Delta Blues. I personally can't wait to listen to some B.B. King and Robert Johnson tunes. That episode premieres on Facebook and on the ISJL Virtual Vacation website at 11 a.m. Central on Tuesday, April 27th. If you want friendly reminders about upcoming episodes, cool resources about our episode topics, and great Southern Jewish content in your inbox a couple times a month, sign up for the ISJL Virtual Vacation newsletter. Visit the ISJL Virtual Vacation website to learn more. Thank you once again to Henry, Donnie, and Eric for sharing their stories and their music with us today. Here's one more tune from Henry Sapoznik to send us on our way. We'll see you next time.
On a morning bright and clear, my old homestead I drew near, just a village down in sunny Tennessee. I was speeding on a train that would take me back again to my sweetheart who was waiting there for me. It had been just a few short years since I kissed away her tears, and I left her at my dear old mother's side. Every day we've been apart, she's grown nearer to my heart, and the night I asked of her to be my bride, I could hear them sadly singing as she bid farewell to me. Far across the fields of cotton, my old home said I could see when the moon rose in its glory, and I told my saddest story of the girl I left in sunny Tennessee. train drew in at last, old familiar scenes I passed as I kissed my mother at the station door. As the crowd gathered round, tears on every face I found, but I missed the one who I'd been waiting for. As I whispered, "Mother dear, where is Mary? She's not here." Oh, the world seems lonely, sadness came to me when she pointed to a spot in a little churchyard lot where my sweetheart sleeps in sunny Tennessee. I could hear them sadly singing as she bid farewell to me. Water grows the fields of cotton, my home that I could see.